at StaySafeOnline.org. So you can visit us there for tip sheets and other content and event information as well. Again, wanted to reach out and thank our sponsors, past, present, and future, for making all of this possible. Our sponsors help us reach over 10,000 webinar attendees, over 5,000 workshop attendees, and over 15,000 subscribers with our newsletters and other communications. There are 2021 sponsorship spots available. On the left, you'll see what sponsorship tiers we have available. So we have signature, contributing, affiliate, and webinar sponsors only. You're more than welcome to get in touch with me or with the NCSA team to hear more about those opportunities as well. So why are we talking about cyber risk and cyber insurance today? So good question. We're working in a remote world, and as we all know, COVID-19 has made it so that even when things return to somewhat normalcy, we're probably going to be working and living in a much more remote world than we ever did before it happened, right? So we want to understand what are risks and what changing threats are out there. Threats are always increasing, especially when people are spending time at home. We've seen cybercrime go through the roof. The threat landscapes are continuously changing as well. And you want to be able to have a resilient business. We don't just mean from natural disaster or something else, but you want to be able to recover from a cyber breach or a cyber attack. Aside from that, insurance, regardless of any industry, is a complex topic. It can be difficult to understand. Whether it's medical insurance, car insurance, you name it. So we wanted to bring the experts on here to educate all of us, myself and my team included, to some of the things that we may not have considered. So give me 1 second to check in with my team here. Is Matt on, Jennifer?
I don't believe so, but I'll let you know once he joins.
Okay, so Matt is not here yet, but he's the senior director of cybersecurity at Guidewire. And he has worked extensively in the areas of threat intelligence, network defense, system forensics and discovery, enterprise security auditing, malware analysis, and physical security. Matt was previously responsible for research and development on the Guidewire Science Risk Analytics platform, a risk modeling tool used widely in the cyber insurance industry. Matt is an industry speaker, author on cyber risk, and recipient of the 2019 Silicon Valley Business Journal 40 Under 40 honor. We'll be glad to have him whenever he gets here. And we also have with us today Chase Norland, who is the CEO of Transmosis. Transmosis, which is a nationally recognized cybersecurity workforce developer founded in Silicon Valley that enables American workers to develop new careers in the rapidly growing information security industry. Of course, there's also a link there for transmosis.com. Transmosis's proprietary virtual cybersecurity analyst training model serves as the foundation of CyberOps, a military-grade cybersecurity platform with fully integrated cyber liability insurance designed to protect small businesses from cyber attack. Again, there's a link here. We'll be sharing this deck out after the session so that everyone can have access to all the resources that are available. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Olga Livingston, senior economist leading cyber economics analysis at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, better known as CISA. Olga has a background in econometrics with extensive experience in applied economic modeling and risk analysis. Please excuse the noise behind me. There's some construction here. In collaboration with interdisciplinary teams of cybersecurity engineers and information security specialists, Dr. Livingston leads analysis on cyber incident costs and losses, effectiveness, and economic justifiability of potential mitigations, cyber insurance, as well as the overall benefits of cybersecurity investments in reducing cyber risk. And if all of this is going over your head, worry not, because they're here to help narrow down what all of that means. So real quick, I'm just going to check in with Jen. Do we see Matt available?
Not yet. I think we can go ahead and get started with Olga and Chase's presentations, though.
Alrighty, so we're going to jump into Chase's presentation here. Chase, go ahead and take it away.
Wonderful. You hear me okay, Zarmina and everybody?
I hear you fine.
Beautiful. Hey, everybody. Thank you, Zarmina. Thank you for great introduction there, and also great to participate with the NCSA here, a really exciting organization. And obviously, there's a lot to do as it relates to small business, or what we also call SMB, small to medium-sized business, security-related issues, which are obviously increasing today, as evidenced by Zarmina's opening statement there. And yeah, to kind of refresh, I run Transmosis. We started in Silicon Valley approximately 6 years ago. We're a national leader in training security analysts through state and federal funding. So we come at this from the business of training security analysts throughout the country. And in doing so, we launched a new service called CyberOps designed to protect small business from cyber attack. And the reason why it came about is because it ties into the next slide here, Zarmina, if you want to kick us off on slide 3, in that small businesses, and we really kind of started realizing this a couple of years ago when we started building CyberOps, in that small businesses are now the #1 target for cyber attack today. And there's some pretty alarming statistics related to this, but essentially what's happened in terms of the evolution of this is, we've gone from this kind of world of, call it 5, 10 years ago in cybersecurity, this idea of a lonely hacker who's going to breach B of A. And those days are kind of effectively gone. All the larger companies have much more robust security systems. And what that means is cyber criminal activity has really become incredibly organized. So this is no longer the lone hacker, although there are still obviously those types out there. But this is organized criminal activity where they're literally going into offices every day and they have resources. And what's essentially happening is they're just going down the list from least secure to most secure. So it's, of course, there's an ever increasing attacks in the enterprise as well. If you look at the SolarWinds attack, et cetera. But really the low hanging fruit here is small businesses. And they are the most vulnerable today. And the kinds of risks that they're carrying are really incredible. We're going to talk about that here in a second. But there's some alarming stats we should pay attention to here, in that one of the more recent stats was that small businesses are really the #1 target for these attacks now, especially today. It's increased since a couple of years ago. A lot of those small businesses and SMBs, they're going out of business within 6 months or so after being attacked. And what that means is, and we're going to get into this, it's not this abstract concept, of an attack, and I'm going to be able to get over this. I'll only have to pay a $10,000 ransom. The universe of risk for small businesses is through the roof, and we're going to get into that. And we believe that the industry has a massive marketing problem, because SMBs and small businesses in particular, and when I say small businesses, I mean call it under a couple hundred employees, or in most cases under 100. We call those micro businesses. I mean, they're already struggling with COVID, and they're not aware of this risk. And we're going to talk about what that risk means here in a second. The average ransomware payout now, which is really the most fastest increasing threat to small businesses, is almost a couple $100,000. As Zarmina noted in the opening statement, work from home is making this worse. Everyone's working from home. There's all these unsecure IoT devices sitting in the house, and going back and forth from your personal laptop to your business computer, and not very secure wireless routers, and kind of the list goes on and on. So that's really accelerating this. And there is quite a lot of ransoms that are being paid out here among small businesses and even sole proprietorships, because they're so incredibly vulnerable. And in most cases, they're not doing the things, and we're going to talk about this, they're not doing the things that they need to be doing to protect themselves and to insure themselves, which is the purpose, of course, of this discussion. And so the way to best boil, we think, this risk down is what we call first and third party risk. And this might sound like kind of fancy insurance terms, but kind of the historical risk related to small businesses is first party. This is the stuff that we kind of always think about. We're going to go in a second here, talk in more detail about it. that's the classic, I've been attacked and, what do I do next? And now there's ransoms associated with that, et cetera. So that's kind of the traditional risk that small businesses and really all enterprises have been carrying for a number of years now. But now making matters worse, and we're going to get into some details on this, there's this universe of third-party risks that we understand that most small businesses are not aware of. And a lot of that third-party risk is a function of the ever increasing online ecosystem and connections of partners, vendors and companies, et cetera, due to the nature of the internet and the digital world that we live in. So there's this whole universe of third-party risk that is actually, we believe, much more potentially devastating than the first-party risk, and combined, it's really through the roof. And so, on top of that, we have an environment where, as a small business, your large companies that you may be partnered with, they're now requiring higher cybersecurity standards. So kind of regardless of the first and third party risk that you're carrying as a small business, your partners are now increasingly, and we're going to see this, I think, as a continuing larger trend, where larger companies are going to require cyber liability insurance and stronger protection measures for their small business partners, because that's how a lot of these guys are getting breached. Remember, like the Target hack. Well, the Target hack, which was about 3 or 4 years ago, it came in through an HVAC system that was connected to the internet. So who was the vendor on that? So you could dig into those details, but that gives you the idea. So expect all the requirements for buttoning yourself up technologically and insurance-wise to continue to increase here as that first and third party risk continues to accelerate. And that's a segue for the next slide, Sarmia, is talking about what does this mean. So for first party liability, that's what I was really talking about earlier, which is this is the kind of classic attack, the more common attacks we've seen over the last 5 or 10 years, directly attacking you, the small business owner, attacking your network. Might even be, it can also describe, attacking your vendor system where you're connected to. So that's also first party. And so what that means is the kinds of damages are associated with notifying customers and employees essentially of a major data breach. So typically it's a data breach, it's data theft, it's obviously ransomware, which is really the fastest growing category right now to our understanding. And then that's going even one step further, meaning it's a ransomware / extortion, meaning that you're no longer just paying to get your data back, you're paying to ostensibly get your data back and prevent the criminal group from disclosing all the data from the breach on the dark web or publicly online. So it's now moved to extortion, which is pretty serious. And so what does all that mean? Well, it means lots of costs, time, resource, and significant damage to you, the small business owner. It means obviously reputational damage. That's the major thing, because obviously in an extortion situation, you found out that your customers found out that you were hacked because it's online, and it's really hard to recover from that because your small business customers don't trust you anymore to come back. There's of course all the data recovery expenses. That typically means engaging with the cybersecurity forensic experts. Those are very expensive. You've got the PR associated costs to reverse hopefully as much of the reputational damage as you can. And of course, you've got all the legal liability related to some of those breaches as well. And then of course, business downtime. Your business is down while you're trying to figure all this out. So you can kind of get a sense already that just the first party alone is significantly damaging and something to be paying attention to. And the next slide, Zarmina, we talk now about, on top of all of that, there's this third party liability, which is to some degree really kind of a new development called over the last 5 years in terms of cyber risk. And it's an area that a lot of small business owners really are just not aware of. And like I said, there's this kind of abstract concept of an attack because it might not have happened to you yet. So it seems very abstract. But one thing that I think every business owner understands is insurance. That's why we're all carrying business liability insurance. So really reframing this around the risk that you're carrying, we think is a better way of understanding cybersecurity in general and how to protect yourself and how to mitigate your risk with insurance. So this third party liability, this is due to all the connections that you as a small business owner have with third parties, like we were talking about. So partners, customers, vendors, et cetera. And so what that means is there's all kinds of a whole new layer of legal exposure with your partners, because like in the Target example, like I said, now Target could be suing you. Your bigger customers could be suing you. There's legal fees associated with defending yourself. There's going to be several settlements. There'll be judgments related from that, civil awards, et cetera. So you got this kind of mountain of legal exposure that creates a very heavy cost for a data breach or other type of attack. And all that third-party liability is really sitting on top of all your first-party liability. So that what that really means is obviously canceled customers, larger companies dropping you, lawsuits, and this really should be its own category. And I think we update these slides in the future. It will be regulatory fines. If you look at that, so what's happening now in states like New York, California, and some other kind of cutting-edge states, there's all these privacy acts. So many of you have heard of maybe the SHIELD Act in New York, the CCPA, the Privacy Act in the state of California. What that means is anyone transacting online that has a customer from the state of New York or the state of California in their database, and that database is breached, you are now not just exposed to the first and third party liability that we just talked about, but now you're exposed to all the state regulatory fines from those states, and they are really quite large. So that gives you a really, a good flavor for why it's so difficult to survive, kind of legally from a cost perspective, after a significant data breach or an attack or a ransomware attack, because you have first-party liability sitting on top of third-party liability, and of course, all the regulatory risk and fines associated with that. This is something, if you kind of think about all of that, that is a very different way of thinking about your cybersecurity protection and insurance than thinking about it from the abstract concept of an actual, cyber attack itself. I think that's the problem, is that the industry really has kind of a marketing problem associated with communicating that risk to the small business owner. So what do you do? So the next slide, Zarmina, kind of touch on this a little bit, is, first, how do you find all this? So cyber liability insurance, to our understanding, is the fastest growing category of commercial insurance today. And it's typically existed at the medium to larger enterprise level, and it's rapidly making its way to the SMB and the small business level. So that's all good news. So cyber liability insurance is coming. It's coming fast, and it is getting normalized, but it's difficult. The research is difficult to figure out. Who do I talk to? What's the right policies, et cetera. It takes time. Small business owners, don't want to deal with that. These policies, like Zarmina noted in the beginning, it's complicated. It's sometimes not clear what's being covered. These are like 20-page. You've seen these insurance policies, 10, 20-page policies, and there's carve-outs, and there's a lot of fine print, and there's not quite sure what the right technology that's going to get those claims approved, and there's things like sublimits, et cetera. So it gets complex, and then kind of making matters worse, and not to knock insurance brokers. But insurance brokers really are not equipped today at selling cyber liability insurance, even though they're selling it, and certainly in the medium to larger enterprises, but they're not really geared to do that. So they're really not experts at selling that. And we think that's going to improve. They're going to get better. There's a lot of cutting edge brokers out there who really are on top of that. But I think as a whole, that's an area where they're not that educated. And so they certainly don't know a lot about the technology associated with what's going to constitute the correct technology for getting paid out on a claim. So that's another area of difficulty. It requires ongoing diligence. So you've heard of stories where, okay, I bought my cyber liability policy 2 or 3 years ago, and you kind of set and forget it, like any small or SMB business owner would, and everything's changed, or there's new policies that you didn't upgrade to, and your old policy didn't have the right social engineering coverage, or there are carve-outs because the industry is moving so fast. So staying on top of that and doing your diligence on a regular basis is a pain in the butt, and that's making this difficult. So, and then not maintaining your own the controls and the updates that are required in the fine print of these cyber liability policies. Those can also jeopardize claim payment. So there's a lot to do on the research side, and small business owners and SMBs, they're getting better at this, and there are great brokers out there. So this is not impossible, and there are great brokers that can handle a lot of this. Some of the larger technology companies servicing, medium-sized companies are offering this, but for small business owners, it's pretty tough to navigate. So I'm the next slide here. This is where we think a better approach should be, we also view this, and we're going to finish with this on the next slide, we also view this as really one of the key trends in the industry that we think is going to continue, which is the integration of technology or cybersecurity technology, and cyber liability insurance, where essentially the insurer on the back end is vetting and standing by the technology provider. We think that's going to continue. And so what that means is you're going to have a higher likelihood of having your first and third party coverages covered, essentially, and the liability associated with that. So that means all the kind of fine print that you see here, business interruption expenses, cyber extortion reimbursement, legal expenses, all the costs of forensics with experts, they're really expensive. There's even compliance expenses, right? If you're violating a law in New York, or California. And by the way, many other states are rolling out these privacy acts. So we're going to have multiple states that are doing this. New York and California are pioneers of this and leading the way. Having all your third-party coverage, liability covered. So the liability costs associated with all of your partners, all the legal fees associated with that. If they're suing you, you're being able to correctly defend yourself and cover that. There's things like additional endorsements. Some of the better insurance providers have standard endorsements that are part of the policies, like say there's invoice manipulation, someone socially engineered you to one of your employees to pay an invoice out to a bogus entity. Things like betterment, which essentially is replacing your systems and upgrading them with the best technology after the breach, which is really a nice thing. Covering for business interruption due to human error, covering additional insured, where you can add like key strategic partners on your policy. So all this is here today, but the kind of the main thing that we think to be looking for, unless you're really digging in, doing your research, and can handle vetting all the technology on your own and finding the right broker and kind of pulling all that together, which is great if you can do that. Our general feeling is that SMBs and small business owners should be looking for these fully integrated solutions, where the insurer is connected to the technology provider and everything is effectively bundled together. And Zarmina takes us kind of to our closing slide here, which is, what are the kind of key trends happening? Well, like I said, it is the fastest growing cyber liability insurance, fastest growing category of commercial insurance. One of the projections is $10 billion in 2021. I already said it's making its way to the SMB. So, it's a huge growth opportunity. And what's happening, this is, I guess, relatively recent developments is, everyone's hearing about all these increased attacks and obviously all these increased ransomware attacks. So that's obviously making insurers and commercial insurers and reinsurers a bit more nervous. So you're seeing some rates go up kind of in the, call it the shorter term. And also this is fairly new, since these attacks are going up and it's making its way to this new business, SMB and small business. There really isn't enough long-term data on claims to do the kind of the correct insurance back-end calculations on what payouts are going to be and what the appropriate fees should be for policy. So what that means is we're really in a bit of a Wild West situation. But like I said, the good news is that the industry is moving in the right direction, despite the fact that there's these increased attacks that are making the back end insurers nervous. What's also good news that's happening is that there's much better technology. There's way better technology providers today. And that's only increasing in terms of being able to protect you. There's companies are, ourselves included, not to plug, they're doing 24/7 security operations centers with live analysts that are watching out for businesses. Commercial insurance companies love that. That's another great way to mitigate their risk. So there's this, we believe, kind of final thoughts here is there's going to be this continued trend of integration of cybersecurity technology and cyber liability insurance, because essentially what it's doing, it's reducing the risk on both sides, reducing the risk for the insured, because they're now able to work with technology providers that meet the criteria for overall mitigating their risk and mitigating their claim risk by decreasing the potential volume and severity of attacks. And then on the reverse side, it's obviously reducing the risk for the small business owner, because now they no longer, like the previous slide, they no longer have to go to the insurance broker and do the research and do I have the right technology and what's carved out, what are the endorsements, et cetera. When that's all vetted and those two are more tightly integrated, which is now starting to happen, the small business owner really wins, because they can really be confident that they can move to they know the policy is going to get paid, most likely in full or in full. It's going to get paid quickly, and they don't have to worry about kind of staying on top of that all the time. They can get back to the business and running their business. So With that, thank you guys very much for having me. I look forward to Q&A at the end of this.
All right, thank you so much, Chase. I believe we have Matt on, so I'm going to stop the recording for just a minute and we're going to go back to his slides. Bear with me, guys.
Overview of cyber insurance. It's really informative. I have a lot of follow-up points on there that I'm going to address in my presentation. I also want to thank the National Cybersecurity Alliance for their invitation and their work they're doing to improve our nation's cybersecurity posture. I think, obviously that one of the most important things is we need to keep businesses running. And Chase actually mentioned this. Cyber insurance is a great way to help transfer some of that risk and keep our businesses running, because that's what they do. They shouldn't have to, worry about a cyber event taking them out. So there's just one more factor to that. So let me just start with a hypothetical here. You're a small business and the CEO says that you've got $10,000. You got to use that towards security improvements. And there's a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of you have worked with security vendors, or you've seen other security vendors in the space trying to peddle you new tools, processes, software that will help improve your your security posture. But one of the things you don't hear too much about is, you could use that and buy a cyber insurance policy. And I don't think, again, this is going to lead into my next slide around what's the difference between cybersecurity and cyber risk. They're two industries that we hear a lot about. I think there's probably some confusion between the two. So I wanted to give an overview around at least how I define it, and I think a lot of folks in the industry will define it in a similar fashion. So cybersecurity is a subset of cyber risk. When you think about cybersecurity, you're talking about securing resources and people. So that means you want, a programmatic solution. You want, they call it information management security system. You want technical factors. You want antivirus. You want firewalls. You want things that you can actually put in place to prevent an attack. You're also looking at a system that can be audited. So if you think about common frameworks like ISO 27001 or SOC 2 Type 2 or Type 1, again, these are commonalities for cybersecurity that that we can measure against and that can be put in place at organizations. Now, how does that differ with cyber risk? Cyber risk is a much broader discipline. So it's going to focus on elements of cybersecurity, but you're also going to couple that with economic factors, revenue, or even human behavior. And I think Olga is going to be talking to some of that in her presentation. Cyber risk is it's a science. So with that, you can bring in advanced data points. You can do modeling. So you can do different types of modeling, like stochastic or deterministic modeling. Those types of modeling are very common if you look at earthquakes or floods, where you have the data behind it to actually model what a future event would look like. And so that's part of the cyber risk discipline. And then one of the things is you can also bring in both technical and non-technical factors. So a good example of this, I'm sure everyone's heard about, the GameStop frenzy. But if you look at the stock market, you have technical type factors of which way you think the market will go based on prior data points, and then you've got the non-technical of forums blowing up and people contributing text. This might be like dark web if you think about the cyber security space. So bringing that data in is going to help align with your cyber risk posture. And when we talk about cyber risk, I want to talk a little bit about the threat side. So, securing your organization is typically what's on everyone's mind is how do I make my organization most secure? But you can't answer that question unless you think about what are the threats to my business. So let's go into the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the data. So I compiled a couple of data points here to present. I thought that would be relevant to this audience. So looking at US-centric companies, $1 billion in revenue or less, and primarily focused in the US. we looked at the top sectors for these types of cyber attacks. So if the top three are listed here. So we've got education, which is schools, universities. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. We've got business services, which are any service that provides professional services. So law firms, consulting groups, healthcare service, professional type services. Those are listed as business services. And then we've got hospitality, which is, of course, the travel, the hotels of the world. And looking at that data, we see that these industries are attacked most. They're affected by the attackers out there today. And why is that the case? So these sectors typically have a lower security profile than other sectors, so they're easier targets. Attackers love to go after the lowest hanging fruit. If they don't have to spend very much time, they won't. And if the reward is high, so if they have deep pockets, they're able to get the most reward for their efforts. Just with any other industry or any other profession, you want to minimize cost and maximize profits. And some other data on top of that. So we noticed that these sectors also have, on average, a higher rate of payment, specifically related to ransomware, which help fuels the fire. Again, there's Chase might have touched on this, some legislation around what businesses should do and how they should pay. I'm not here to say that one is more right than the other, but regardless, we see that these industries have a higher rate of payment. There's also a lot more leverage within these businesses of taking businesses down. So Chase probably mentioned business interruption and first-party data breach. The idea is if you have leverage where you can hold an entire business hostage, they want to get back online as soon as possible. So there's more reason for them to pay because they're losing exponentially amounts more revenue. And then, of course, the double whammy effect, where not only can you hold system hostages, but you can also extort people and leak data. So the combination of all of that makes these industries the top targeted sectors. Now, if we look at the vectors, so what are people actually using once they compromise systems? So, first and foremost, ransomware. I talked to a lot of my incident responder friends, people who are in the business, and can't get enough ransomware. I mean, it's just so much. That is the number one method, especially targeting small businesses. Second, though, is business email compromise. So it's the idea of stealing accounts related to businesses. I'll explain why that's important in a second. But yeah, why are they choosing these? So ransomware is scalable, meaning you don't need a lot of manual effort. You can automate the task, you can deploy it. Some ransomware is wormable. You need something, the attacker, at least from the attacker side, they need something that scales easily. So ransomware is perfect for that. And they can reuse it. So they don't need to modify too much. They can use the same control infrastructure and minimize costs for development. And then lastly, around why are these vectors so popular? Think about ransomware. The payment method is direct to these actors. So it's not like they need to exchange money. They don't need to go to a Western Union and collect money anymore. It's all digital, it's all crypto, and they get that cash right away. For business email compromise, access is king. And so that is highly in demand, especially on the dark web. Business emails are used to not only send emails or spam emails, but they can be used to pivot into accounts. Think about all of your online accounts that might be linked to your email. You just do a password reset, and now you're into that account. So those are very lucrative. And then lastly, crypto is one of those things that's appreciating like crazy. So attackers have more incentive to use it and to demand it, knowing that there's some long-term value at stake as well. So they maximize their profits through other means. So I know you might have questions. I think we're holding questions till the end. But just on my last slide, going back to the initial question, the hypothetical that I gave, Zarmina, if you wouldn't mind just moving to the last one here. I'll let you think about what is the right answer. I don't think there's a right answer here. Again, it'll depend on your situation. On the button press, Zarmina, the last one. But it's important to understand the difference, especially with what a cybersecurity element is and what a cyber risk element is, and weighing those decisions for your business. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it back over. Thank you so much. Look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, Matt. I think that ties things together very nicely. You went over a lot of threats and what the threat landscape looks like, and that, of course, lends to Chase's discussion. So here we're going to go into Dr. Livingston's portion. I will just caution the speakers that we are going to have to keep pretty concise here towards the end so that we can make time for Q&A. So with that, Olga, please take it away.
Sure. Can you hear me now, Zarmina?
Yes. If there's any sound issues, please let us know in the chat, but I can hear you fine.
Next slide, please. So I will talk about where cyber insurance fits in the context of risk management and overall business objectives, right? Decision context. And then if we have time, we'll zero in on what to look for or look out for in the cyber insurance. There is a report, publicly available report on that. So if we run out of time, all information is there. It's not too long to get through. So decision context, what's on top of your everyday decision making, right? It's business objective is profit and growth. For SMBs, cybersecurity ranks third or fourth out of the business objectives that are there or other business priorities. Within risks, cyber ranks consistently around fourth, fifth, but there are other risks, operational and strategic risks besides cyber. Now, within cyber risk management, where does that sit? Where does this insurance sit? There are four strategies for CRM. One is avoid, one is reduce, one is transfer, one is accept. So cyber insurance sits under transfer. But I want to make sure that we understand what avoid, reduce, and transfer and accept mean. So quick example. Accept is when you fully understand the consequences, likelihood and cost, and then you're willing to take that on. So common misconception here is that you need insurance for things that spread through like wildfire, like all types of incidents. That is not the case. So you know what else spreads through like wildfire? Lies through a middle school, but you don't file it with insurance, you don't go to the doctor, you go to the corner store, get rid for the kid, bottle of red for mama and deal with it. So essentially, this is not the type of incident where, in cyber terms, it would be reimaging one, not the type of incident where you need to consider insurance. So this is your high probability, low consequence event. You might hear these terms. I just want you to be comfortable with it. So avoid, assume that it's an icy day, right? And you decide not to go to the store. You're entirely avoiding the risk of a car accident, but you accept the risk of the dear offspring, sharing your newly adopted pets with the rest of the family. But you've avoided higher risk and you've accepted the lower one. Now reduce the control. So that's studded tires. Is that it? No, because that's just a technology piece of it. So you still have to be cautious, do defensive driving and slow down. That's behavior and people, critical element, people. And let's hope that your car and the brakes have been maintained properly on a regular basis. That's your processes. So at least three elements, not just technology. So for cyber, the Nist cybersecurity framework and the manual of controls is in Nist 833. There are examples, but there are other standards as well. And they map to Nist CSF and 853. So now we're in the risk transfer. Critical point here. Risk transfer comes after risk reduction decision, not before, not in lieu of, after. So there's an overlap there between transfer and the upper end continuum of controls, right? But logically, that decision, the transfer decision, comes after. You have several options as well, not just the insurance. List here is not in any particular order, that bottom list. It's just for you to understand the options. Outsource. So you can pay to have your order delivered, right? Fairly common option. For example, DHS, the entire agency, outsources payroll processing to USDA. So federal government agencies outsource portion of HR functions to OPM, with background checks outsourced to contractors. But the lesson here is that you can outsource the function, you still get to retain the good chunk of risk. So partial transfer, but you're still the one who owns it. We all know what happened. Contractual agreements. When you're buying a car, you get a warranty, right? And then you get notifications about issues and recalls. That's on the dealer and manufacturer up until a certain point, but the maintenance is on you. So there is a contractual agreement or expectation as part of that purchasing transaction that you draw a line as who's responsible for what. So for cyber, think of this as buying a software from someone else, right? And recent events are being a good example of how it works or how it doesn't, depend on which side of that you are. Now, risk sharing, also an option. So think about it this way. You're a florist and your system is down, but you have a network of florists that can fill your orders. So this is what airlines do when delays occur or you have overbooking. Key here is that customers do not lose the service and you do not lose the customers. And you can have a partial reimbursement mechanism between the partners in this network. Now, there is also risk pooling. So if you're a serial entrepreneur and you have dozen revenue streams, one line of business gets hit, but the rest generate enough profit to offset the loss on that one. So serial entrepreneur does not mean, 4 taco trucks instead of 1. So you're running bakery, yoga studio, plumbing business, bed and breakfast, and you even side hustle has a hustle. So point here is diversification and spreading the risk over a large base of business units and product lines. So that's the key. And keep in mind that small businesses, although we talk about micro small businesses as less than 100 employees, the definition of small business administration for small businesses varies by industry, and it can go as high as 38 million in revenue per year or 1,500 employees. That is just small. Medium does not have as clean of a working definition. So you have thousands and thousands. Some small, medium-sized businesses would be bigger than my agency. Now,
Olga, if I can just interrupt you for a second,
yeah,
we have 3 more minutes for you so that we can get to the Q&A as well. I'm very
sure. So the flip side of the pooling is that you might have correlated risk. If you use one app, most likely use the same paying app through all the businesses. So that's accumulation risk or correlated risk. And then if you're backing up all to the same server, that's one point of failure. So with that, let's define cyber insurance. That's on the next slide. Next slide, please. So cyber insurance is a risk transfer, It's a risk transfer tool that offsets portion of the cost for some of the incidents. That's the key, some of the cost for some of the incidents. Now, on the next slides, I put several resources for you that are free, concise, and have information that's relevant for small, medium-sized businesses. Here you have a cost of the incident to do BIA. Why do you need to do BIA? Because you need to understand what's the impact to your business, to understand which part to outsource, which part to do risk control on, and which part to do cyber insurance. Could you please go to next slide? One more? Yeah, one more. Some of these challenges, some of these challenges have already been mentioned by Chase, but the point here is that there are some objective reasons why insurance industry is where it is now. That is described in the report publicly available. What I want to emphasize is you have lack of standardization of the language, which as Chase talked about. You have issues with lexicon. So it's not just fine print, it's the vernacular used to communicate what's included, what's excluded. Seemingly, that's a part where there might be the most progress in the recent years. Then you have limited coverage. So up until recently, business interruption has not been included. So be careful what you're looking for there versus it's covered or not. Common misconception, silent cyber. If the cyber is not excluded, then it's implicitly covered. Insurance is trying to nix that because that's surprise claims for them. So be careful whether it's in or out. Low limits and sublimits is talked about it. Significant exclusions being business image compromise. Pricing. This is where the one discussion that I want to emphasize. There is an expectation that if you do better, tighter security practices, your price is going to go down. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And I'll explain why. Now we're talking about SMBs, with the exception of large companies like Beasley's and AIGs that are leads of the world and work with a specific segment of business of cyber insurance. Most of the packages are either standalone or packaged policies, where the security posture of the insured does not even come into the play in the premium calculation. It's not part of the formula. So there is research about that. Sasha Romanowski, Journal of Cybersecurity. That is to say that you might hope that you're doing better and you have tighter practices and you have documentation to show how good you work, your insurance goes down. That is not the case. Now, for SMBs specifically, it is not the case, because what you're looking at often is cheaper packaged policies that are being pooled. So cyber insurance is doing that to manage their risk across the SMBs. So they're selling prepackaged policies across many different SMBs. Claims are fired upon a portion of that segment, profit from the rest pays for it. So being a volume sales product, it means it's priced to the market, and price is influenced by excess capacity, not your security posture. So that is a key part to understand. And next slide, please. I'll close with this. So what to look for? So clear coverage, clear language, exclusions. Make sure that you get to look at the sample of the policy, and there is a FAQ summary that can help you along. Do not assume cyber is included if it's not explicitly mentioned. Clarify the kinds of incidents are included. Again, back being one of the examples. Cost and loss categories. Not everything that intuitively seems to be included is in the policy. So be careful what cost factors come into play. I included reference to business impact analysis. It discusses cost categories. Also, the resources that I posted on the previous slides, you don't have to go to that. But look under net diligence, they have a very good data set with the costs specific to SMBs. So that's the key here. And then you're often considering services included, bundled with insurance. So be careful what you're getting. Are services in or out? Some companies might need that, others have that in-house. Again, keep in mind how SMBs are defined. And then last but not least, specific requirements. If you have coverage and it's part of the transaction, you said that you're doing something that you're not, when a claim's filed, you're not going to get paid. So key here is what it's claimed, filed, and it's successful for you to retrieve the payment. When incidents happen, that's not the time to go through the discovery process to figure out what the requirements and stipulations were, right? So the key here is understand what's required. If you say you're doing backups, where in the garage is that backup hard drive? So it's be very careful what's in, what's out, and what's expected of you for this process to work. Again, cyber insurance is a risk transfer tool. It transfers some of the cost for some of the incidents to somebody else's balance sheet. That's the key. Now, we need to understand how it works. And if we know what we're getting as customers and it can fit our purposes, then it's a good, important risk tool to consider. But it is not substitute for risk reduction or control strategy. So that's my overall closing. And with that, I'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. We've got 8 minutes left, so we're going to jump straight into, let's see here. We're going to go straight into Q&A so that we can make sure that we get some of our attendees' questions answered. So to start off, I think Jennifer has been monitoring the chat for us. What was the first question you mentioned there?
So we got a question from one of our audience members. What is the difference between a broker versus a provider?
Chase, I can answer that just high level. Some other insurance experts on our call today. I mean, the broker is your classic insurance broker. So think of your car insurance, right? Auto, home, etc. They're brokering policies on behalf of a myriad of different back-end insurance companies. And now they're, of course, expanding into cyber liability risk and insurance. So that's becoming an increasing part of the portfolio. And that's why, like I was saying in the previous presentation, it's why it's complicated, because the brokers are really incentivized to sell as many policies as possible, not to necessarily be experts at cyber liability insurance. And they might have 5 or 10 different back-end providers for that. So that makes it more complicated. And then, of course, the provider is the actual commercial insurance company, like Chubb, for example.
Thank you for that answer. Do any of our other panelists want to add anything to that?
No, it's fairly concise.
All right, thanks.
Well said.
Jennifer, do we have any other questions from the chat, or should we choose from our discussion list?
We do have one more question for Chase about the process you mentioned in your slides. Would that be different for a larger organization?
Process. Well, I'm going to assume you mean process in terms of, looking to find integrated cyber liability insurance. I assume that's what you mean. If that's not the case, you can message us right now. Assuming that's the case, our focus is around SMB and small business and providing that integrated technology with the cyber liability insurance. As you move up the food chain, the larger enterprises, call it medium to larger enterprises. A lot of these guys already have pretty sophisticated cyber liability insurance in place. They're going to have multi-seven-figure policies. They're going to have very strong security controls, probably cybersecurity teams. So you're going to see typically those companies more buttoned up. The real vulnerability here, obviously, and the whole point of this discussion today is that the SMB and the small business owner typically hasn't historically had access to that.
And if I may add to that, please, about 30% of SMBs do not have in-house expertise, they outsource. And then 30, that's like 27, we're in our own survey. So you have a third that have nothing, third that outsource and have services on contract, and third that have ad hoc. Therefore, the third that has either in-house expertise or the other third that has outsourced service already in place, make sure that the services that you're getting are covered by that insurance. What I mean is there might be preferred digital forensics company listed. There might be preferred IR company listed. So the one that you have might not be the one that they cover. So that's the only catch. And it goes for other services, post-event services. Pre-event services are not covered as much in general, but still worth checking out.
All right. And so for Olga, we have a question regarding where to start as a small or medium-sized business.
Well, two thoughts. One, some might advise you to go and find a broker that can explain it. I would suggest look at the report. It's about 10 pages, so you understand what the issues and underwater problems could be. So when you go in and knock into the broker, you know what questions to ask. So first do your homework, but the homework would be, that's one good place to start, then do references on the references. It's not academic. It's written in a very accessible language.
Gotcha.
That said, also BIA. Please do business impact analysis. All the starting point for that is on the slide. Sorry, not all. Starting point for that is on the slide in this deck. I hope it will be shared. If not, we'll find a way to get it to you. And third, look at the cyber essentials and things to do. That's also on one of the slides. So if you're on with the program, you'll be looking at Nist CSF or you're already using it. However, if you're just starting, there are simple things that you can do to protect yourself. So start with the basics while you're shopping for the insurance. That's probably the best combination.
Thank you. And yes, the slides will be shared out with everyone who's attending today. Another question, and this is more so for discussion, what key items should a cyber insurance policy cover? I think Olga covered some of this in her last few slides. If you just want to reiterate, we can hear from all three of you on this one.
I guess instead of writing off the types of things that need to be covered, because to the extent it does depend which system or asset you're on and what kind of losses you're looking at, go to that BIA link that I mentioned. It does list cost factors that you want to consider. And then if you look at the net diligence report, it summarizes the cost. So in turn, that tells you what's there. Does that make sense? But I would also suggest to look at the tight definition of what cyber incident is, because what you think it is might not be what it is in the insurance terms.
It's a very good point. Since it's 2:59, this will be my last question. How can small to medium-sized business employees convince their leadership, the business owners themselves, that cyber insurance is worth the cost? How would you approach that?
I can answer that unless anybody else wants to jump in.
Go for it.
Go ahead. Chase, go ahead. You're in the space and I can add.
Well, that was kind of the whole theme of my presentation is SMB and small business owners should already be aware of this, and they need to stop thinking about this from the perspective of the abstract attack that may never happen and start thinking about it in terms of liability. When you look at it in terms of first and third party liability, it's really quite daunting and quite scary. And then I think so the industry really has a marketing problem. The industry has to better communicate that risk to SMB, small business owners.
Okay, I'll take it from there. So the business impact analysis needs to be done in the business relevant units, dollars. If you do heat map and the other business areas show up with dollars, they're going to get the money, we're going to get more crayons. So it's one. Second, I would suggest not doing extreme estimation where you grab numbers so high that you get either skepticism or kind of a FUD environment where the unintended psychological response is to shut down and do nothing. So no gloom, doom in the boardroom. That would be another one. And be careful. Don't grab 2021 trillion estimate for cyber losses or whatever it is, 6, if the US GDP is 21, because the natural question is going to be, where is that coming from? And the last but not least, if somebody's telling you it's 6 trillion losses and buy the shiny thing, this is where you want to stop and reconsider the conversation. Because what you want to know is the IV&V on the results or performance of that particular thing that's been sold to you that you in turn are going to be presenting to leadership. You need to be able to communicate the performance of the technology or processes that you're suggesting.
Awesome. Well, I hate to cut you off there, but with that, we are at 3:01. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, and especially our speakers. If you need to get in touch with us, here's our Twitter, StaySafeOnline, our website, StaySafeOnline.org, and our email, of course, info@StaySafeOnline.org. Thank you all for being here and joining us for Cybersecure My Business webinar. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.